Bitch by Jason Bradford. Chapter 9. Nightmares of Death. The sunlight seemed to make it a habit to paint the forest in shades of fantasy. Everywhere Jack looked, he noticed things were extra vibrant and lush. Even the birds appeared to sing new songs. He wondered if it had always been that way, or if it was just because Karen woke something up inside of him. Just being around her seemed to open up so much happiness and positivity, calming emotions, and a certainty that life was going to be a wonderful adventure. He watched her sleep on her side. She was kicking in her sleep again. He figured he'd probably never sleep with her in bed again if he expected a decent night's rest instead of black and blue bruises and busted ribs. The fallen tree was behind him, and Karen was on his other side. He was sandwiched in a groove, snuggled down on the forest floor, but with Karen so close to him that he felt her body heat, the need for his blue cotton blanket never crossed his mind. He found himself quite comfortable pressed up against her. The only thing that was still the same as always was his worry about Wanda. Karen stirred. Karen dreamed of when she was a puppy. She had very few memories of when she was very young, but the ones she did have normally invaded her dreams. She was in the arms of whom she felt a connection, a bond. It had to be her mother. She was carrying her as well as another pup. There was also a second adult werewolf running beside them. They were covered in blood, and Karen had a vague understanding that they were being chased by something she hadn't seen or felt since. Her mother, the one that had been carrying her, sat her down in the brush and covered her. That was the last image of her that plagued her dreams. The two werewolves and the other pup were gone. She always carried dread in her dreams that the others were all slaughtered, like the pack they had fled. She caught images of them as well, several large werewolves laying in pools of blood, dismembered and their hearts ripped out. Even all the pups were lying in death, heartless with open chest cavities. The moon in her dreams seemed to be a creature in its own right, enveloping her in a cold embrace of blue light and uncertainty. It fingered its way through a tall pine and birch trees that surrounded the area. She had tumbled backwards, out of the brush from where her mother had hidden her and down a steep embankment. The forest spun around her, round and round and round. She finally lay still, dizzy, her head against the tree that she had smacked into. There were large hands reaching for her, coming closer, closer. Jack woke her, and she was swathed in reality again. "Are you okay?" he asked her. "You were whimpering and kicking a lot." Karen looked at him. His skin glowed a beautiful brownish amber in the morning sun. He offered her a smile. His eyes lit up when he smiled, and she could feel her heart beating. He giggled at her. She wondered why he was laughing. Then she realized that in her excitement to see him, her tail was wagging. She rolled over and got up onto her haunches, stood tall and erect, and raised her arms straight out over her head as far as they'd reach. Then she shook her coat and yawned. She hadn't stretched in front of him before, and she hoped he didn't find her beastly. When she looked down to where he had been, she was happy and relieved to see him approaching her. When he met her, his arms wrapped around her, and she could feel his heartbeat, as well as... Jack jumped back. Wearing only a white tank top and boxers, he spun around with his arms kept in front of him. She caught sight of the cause of his sudden, apparent embarrassment, his erection. She hadn't only seen the evidence of his male arousal within his boxers, but she had felt the power of his full erection against her leg when he was hugging her. He excused himself and shouted as he ran into the nearest oak trees. "I have to pee." Oh, it was just that. He had to pee. She thought for a moment that he was excited by her and her scent. She had been excited by him quite a few times, and each time she was, it caught her off guard, and she found great surprise in the fact that she felt an attraction and a sexual pull toward him. Jack found himself hiding behind an oak. His breathing was laborious. He was embarrassed by what had happened. He told her he had to pee, and that was the first thing he could think of doing. He just stood there, breathing heavily. He looked down. He was still fully erect and completely aroused, to the point of his throbbing erection being a bit painful. He was afraid Karen would be offended that a human would think of her in that manner. He was shocked himself. He closed his eyes and tried thinking of things that would cause his throbbing penis to go flaccid. Jack opened his eyes. He was still hard. Why wasn't it going down? He'd never experienced this before. How could he face Karen with a full erection? He looked ahead deeper into the woods. Something caught his attention. It was a large rock, like the side of a cliff in texture, but there was no cliff. The rock was gray, tall and wide. A dark shadow was in the middle of the huge rock, and small trees and brush surrounded it. But the shadow stood uncovered. Was it a shadow, or was that a hole? He stepped toward it, but remembered the threat of the other werewolves. He turned to go back to Karen and have her accompany him. As he was running back, he was happy at the fact that his manhood had decided to rest, thank God. He reached her and was surprised that he had the tone of an excited child at Christmas in his voice. "I found something," he shouted in excitement. "Come look." Jack and Karen wandered into the thick of the woods. Jack led the way. He held tight to her paw. His hand was lost in the size of hers. They reached the large, rugged rock. It was thickly lined on the sides with wild flowers, thick ferns, monk's hood, and other fauna. Thin, tall saplings were reaching up from just under the cave's edge and grew away from the sides. Jack was happy to see it wasn't a shadow that he had seen, but a hole. Karen wandered in first, with Jack close behind. It was empty and huge. The floor was littered with rotting leaves and sticks and such. There was even the skeleton of a long-dead raccoon, but that was it. It was a big, beautiful cave, and it was just out of sight of the hidden clearing that had held the large fallen tree. Jack looked around. It was only one large chamber, but it was vast. He imagined he and Karen would be more comfortable in it. It would fit several Karens. "I think we're home," he told her. Karen perked up, tilted her head, and wagged her tail. "I'll have to get a few things from home. Let's stay here tonight just to see how it feels as a den." Jack paused. A look of seriousness like Karen had not seen before spread across Jack's face. "I need to go see my grandmother today." Jack and Karen returned to the clearing. Jack put on his clothes from yesterday and sat on the fallen tree while he put on his shoes. He looked ahead of him, and the open space was generous. He pictured a large bonfire just before the wooden sofa. It would serve as a place of entertainment, like a large living room, with the bedroom just down the hallway. He looked to where the cave lay. It was less than a minute's walk. Yes, Jack had found a second home that perfectly fit his evolving lifestyle, and it felt right. Karen stayed outside Wanda's house. They were on the other side of town from Jack's house, but closer to her than before, now that the location of the clearing was to be their new den. Jack had often walked from his house to his grandmother's house, but now the walk would be even easier. Karen stayed hidden in the bushes on the side of the house. The house was simple, clean, cheerful, sitting there at the end of the cul-de-sac. The forest was on all three sides of Wanda's house, with her closest neighbors, the Hendricksons, up the road on the right side. Karen could see Jack and Wanda sitting at the kitchen table and talking. White ceramic teacups with pink roses daintily painted on them were before Jack and his grandmother. Steam rising. Karen wondered what tea tasted like. Nearly an hour had gone by. Jack finally came out of the house with Wanda by his side. They kissed and hugged. He strolled down the road and stayed very aware of the sound of Wanda's door closing. He finally heard it. He changed direction and headed back into the woods. Karen also ran into the woods at the alert of the door closing. Karen and Jack met, and Jack was happy. Karen could tell he was relieved, and the load of the heavy burden was lifted from his shoulders. She wished she could ask what they talked about, but all she could do was reach out to him and tilt her head to the side. It was a form of crude communication, but it worked. "I have a feeling everything is going to be okay with her," Jack smiled. "I don't know how I know it, but I do. It helps that I'll be close to her still." Jack followed Karen deeper into the forest, towards the clearing.